learned a little bit about this recent shortage of steel needle infusion sets. This was announced by Tandem, but also Medtronic has had some issues as well. I learned that the shortage of steel needle sets has nothing to do with government-imposed tariffs. It's simply that the company that manufactures them, based in Denmark, they underestimated the demand for steel needle sets. They thought, wow, everybody's going to use these flexible plastic cannulas. But the steel needle sets have really grown in popularity. And I mean, there's good reasons for that. They are much more consistent with the insulin delivery. They don't kink, they don't twist, they don't clog, and they're very comfortable. So the company just underestimated the demand that didn't have the production capability to meet it. So they're in process of gearing up their manufacturing to be able to meet the need. But I did learn today, just from experimenting a little bit, that the infusion set of the steel needle sets is somewhat interchangeable. So the Sure T from MiniMed and the True Steel from Tandem, the infusion set parts can be switched back and forth. The tubing is different. You can't use MiniMed tubing with a Tandem pump and vice versa, but the infusion set parts are interchangeable. Welcome to Think Like a Pancreas, the podcast, where our goal is to keep you informed, inspired, and a little entertained on all things diabetes. The information contained in this program is based on the experience and opinions of the Integrated Diabetes Services clinical team. Please discuss any changes to your treatment plan with your personal healthcare provider before implementing. Hi, this is Gary Scheiner, reporting to you after the fact from my trip to Barcelona a couple of weeks ago to attend the ATTD Conference. ATTD stands for Advanced Technologies and Treatments of Diabetes. This was possibly the best conference I've ever attended from a learning standpoint about all that's happening in the world of diabetes treatment. And there's heavy emphasis at this conference on type 1 diabetes care, although type 2 diabetes gets plenty of exposure as well. But I think the thing that caught my attention the most was nothing at the conference. It was when I went to a grocery store in Barcelona. I was just blown away by the prices. Everything there costs about half as much as it does here in the States. If I could have brought grocery bags with me and lugged them on the plane, I would have. Made me think, maybe I should be doing my grocery shopping in Spain, but probably be offset by the cost of the flight. But anyway, back to our topic. So I have a kind of a list of different things I learned and experienced there that I'd like to share with all of you, and some very unique stuff. This isn't in any particular order, but I do want to start with some of the product developments. And this is mostly from just spending time with the company representatives in the exhibit hall, as well as a few of the corporate sponsored programs that they delivered. I'll start with Tandem Diabetes. They have been planning to launch an extended wear infusion set for quite some time now. It's a very innovative set. It's an angled set. It inserts with a very easy one-button push, self-adhesive type of a thing. The cannula has multiple little openings in it, so the insulin comes out almost like a sprinkler effect. And the cannula doesn't kink. It's got a very flexible material and it's reinforced. I was hoping they'd be launching that infusion set. It's called Steady Set. I was hoping it would be coming out soon. But what I did find out was that they're going to be launching a tubeless version of their pump later this year, likely go by the name Toby to compare with the Mobi that they have now. The Toby is really just the Mobi pump that's been altered a little bit so that it snaps into an adhesive patch that sits on the skin. That patch will have the extended wear infusion set built into it. So the pump will snap right into the patch and be a completely tubeless model. But I did also find out they're not going to launch the Steady Set for users of the Mobi or the T-Slim until after the Toby, the tubeless version, launches later this year. Abbott has been working on a dual sensing continuous sensor. It's going to measure both glucose levels and ketone levels. We've known about this since last year, and they're making tremendous progress on this. I wouldn't be surprised to see this on the market before the end of this year.
And there was some research presented on its functionality. And it does look like we all produce a little bit of ketone at various points throughout the day and night. That this system is going to be very good at detecting sudden changes and rises in ketone levels. And that'll be very effective for troubleshooting purposes, knowing if we're having site issues or problems with the insulin function or a pump-related problem so that we can correct it. It might also lead us into recognizing developing illnesses because infection will also cause ketone levels to rise. Another little bit more sensor news, Eversense, which is the implantable sensor, was recently approved for integration with the Twist insulin pump and hybrid closed loop system. So users of that system will be able to utilize the continuous implanted sensor that lasts for a full 365 days. That's pretty neat. I had a chance to use the Eversense sensor when it first launched. This was a 3-month model that required a transmitter on the skin surface that had to be charged daily. The sensor had to be calibrated multiple times a day. This latest version, this 1-year version, is a much simpler system to use, and it's very accurate. Eversense announced that their next generation sensor called Gemini won't even require recharging of the transmitter. So there'll still be a transmitter on the skin, but you won't have to remove it to charge it at all. Their next gen system will have an implanted transmitter, so everything will be under the skin and you won't have anything on the skin surface. Sequel, which makes the Twist, is going to be launching an extended wear infusion set in the next 6 to 9 months. So that infusion set is still in development. Right now, they only have one infusion set called a Clio. And it works well for some people, not well for others. So it'll be nice to see them developing a better set. Apparently, theirs is a 90-degree flexible cannula extended wear set that should last upwards of a week. And as I mentioned, they're already partnering with Eversense so that with the Twist system, you'll be able to use the Eversense sensor. Sequel is also partnering with Diabeloop, which is an algorithm that was developed and is used in Europe. So users of that Twist pump will have the option of different sensors as well as different algorithms. Traditionally, people have used just the loop algorithm with Twist, and then they'll have the option to use Diabeloop or the loop algorithm soon. Insulet shared some research news regarding the Omnipod 5. They found that users of the system generally need to use more aggressive bolus and correction factor settings than they might have been using prior to going on the system. And those who calculate those based on formulas may need to use more aggressive formulas to achieve optimal control. But they did show that using a target of 110 produces the best outcomes. Very little change in hypoglycemia going with a 110 target as opposed to a higher target, but the time in range was much higher. And they are going to be launching Omnipod 6 sometime in the short-term future that will allow the user to set the target as low as 100. So that's something we can all look forward to. And it should have a better algorithm and better signal reception. Also, in talking with the folks at Insulet, it looks as though the Omnipod DASH pump will continue to be made available at least through 2027. And that's important news for users of open source systems like Trio and Loop, because those utilize the Omnipod DASH as the insulin delivery device. I learned a little bit about this recent shortage of steel needle infusion sets. This was announced by Tandem, but also Medtronic has had some issues as well. I learned that the shortage of steel needle sets has nothing to do with government-imposed tariffs. It's simply that the company that manufactures them, based in Denmark, they underestimated the demand for steel needle sets. They thought, wow, everybody's going to use these flexible plastic cannulas. But the steel needle sets have really grown in popularity. And I mean, there's good reasons for that. They are much more consistent with the insulin delivery. They don't kink, they don't twist, they don't clog, and they're very comfortable. So the company just underestimated the demand that didn't have the production capability to meet it. So they're in process of gearing up their manufacturing to be able to meet the need. But I did learn today, just from experimenting a little bit, that the infusion set of the steel needle sets is somewhat interchangeable. So the Sure T from MiniMed and the True Steel from Tandem, the infusion set parts can be switched back and forth. The tubing is different. You can't use MiniMed tubing with a Tandem pump and vice versa, but the infusion set parts are interchangeable. I attended a session specifically addressing the use of tech in elderly people. I'm about to hit 60, so I could be one of these people already. But thinking more people who are beyond retirement years, and I'm a long way from that. But they did find that in the elderly, that it does tend to be a reduction in basal insulin need in this population. But use of automated insulin delivery still works quite well for the elderly in terms of improved time in range and also less hypoglycemia, especially overnight. Customizing care is always imperative, and at Integrated Diabetes, that's something we pay a lot of attention to. So no matter what a person's age, capabilities, and skill sets are, we try to customize the training and teaching to that individual.
Think Like a Pancreas, the podcast, is brought to you by Integrated Diabetes Services, where experience meets expertise, passion meets compassion, and diabetes care is personal because we live it too. Our team of clinicians, all living with type 1 diabetes, understands the challenges firsthand. We're here to help no matter where you are in the world. From glucose management to self-care strategies, the latest tech, sports and exercise, weight loss, type 1 pregnancy, and emotional well-being, we've got you covered. We offer consultations in English and Spanish via phone, video chat, email, and text. Want to learn more? Visit integrateddiabetes.com or email info@integrateddiabetes.com to schedule a consultation.
Some other updates product-wise, Dexcom is going to be starting to use a stronger adhesive. And I think with the 15-day sensors now available, that's going to be important. Their plan is to eliminate the need for those over tapes that most people have to use with the G7 sensors currently. I was also able to see and learn a little bit about the upcoming G8 sensors. This is a little bit in the distance. It's going to have that stronger adhesive. The sensor itself, the device is about 50% smaller than the G7. It has a MARD below 8%. Now, MARD is a measure of accuracy. The lower MARD is better, and most current sensors are around 8.5%, 9%. So a MARD below 8% is something to get excited about. It means on average, the sensor values are within 8% of what the lab values provide. They also said there's going to be shorter warm-up time. I mean, I don't know what difference that really makes because most of us learn that if we put our Dexcom sensor on before the old one wears off, it warms up on its own. So when we start the new one, we have no warm-up time at all. So shifting gears a little bit to the field of exercise. There's been studies on different approaches to preventing hypoglycemia during exercise. And one group was testing the hypothesis that consuming protein before a workout would help prevent lows. It ends up protein causes the pancreas to secrete glucagon, and glucagon in turn facilitates the release of sugar into the bloodstream from the liver. So they tested different doses and different types. They found that whey protein, W-H-E-Y protein, absorbs and works much faster and more efficiently than traditional dietary protein in the form of meats and dairy. So use of whey protein was tested at different doses, and they found the more you take, the more of a glucagon response you get, and the more of a blood sugar impact it's going to have. So one study, they had people in a fasting state riding a bike for 60 minutes at a moderate pace, and they compared a few different options. One option was to have a modest dose of whey protein half an hour before the workout. And the people who did that saw no decline in their blood sugar on average. People who used a temporary target on their AID system, like an exercise mode, and also had about 10 grams of carb right before the workout, saw about an average of a 40-point drop in their blood sugar. So the protein actually outperformed the temp target as well as the carbs right beforehand. So that was kind of interesting to learn about. We learned a little bit about the effects of menstrual cycle hormones on glucose levels. And we've always known that during the luteal phase or the premenstrual phase, there is a certain amount of insulin resistance that tends to build up. But trying to manage the blood sugars during that time, we didn't really have any guidelines to go by. And the research is showing that the predominant effect takes place during the daytime hours. So for people who want to use different insulin doses or make adjustments on their pumps, we're mainly looking at making those adjustments during the day. Now, going back to some real core research, we've known for decades that tighter glucose control contributes to a reduction in diabetes complications. And this came from the DCCT study in the US and the UK PDS study in Europe. But now, we're not quite as A1C centric. A lot of people aren't even getting A1Cs anymore. We're relying on our CGM to tell us what our average is and how much time in range we spend. So there was some research done on this, looking at time in range and the development of microvascular complications, specifically retinopathy, nephropathy, and neuropathy. And they found a definite correlation. Every 10% increase in time in target range corresponds with a 24% reduced risk of microvascular complications. So if you're currently, let's say, at 60% time in range, getting up to 70% lowers your odds of serious complications by about 25%. That's tremendous news. So we can use time in range now as a metric to assess long-term health risks. A couple of other miscellaneous things. There was some research presented about ultra-rapid insulins. Brand names on these are Fiasp and Lumjev. And we know that with Lumjev, there's sometimes a little bit of stinging at the site because it's a bit more acidic than Fiasp is. But the research shows that with Lumjev, we tend to see less severe peaks in the blood sugar after meals. So if you're willing to deal with a few moments of stinging after a bolus, the Lumjev may actually be a better choice. Something else that we learned has to do with flying when using an insulin pump. I've had patients over the years report to me that they often experience lows when they fly and then rise high after they land. So I took it upon myself to bring a few pumps on a plane with me, just to see what was happening. I wasn't wearing the pumps because I wanted to see if there was insulin movement in the tube and the cannula. And there was. I couldn't measure it, but there definitely was movement of the insulin. So some researchers measured it more precisely, and they found that on average, during ascent, when the plane's going up and the air pressure drops, there's an average of 0.6 units of delivery of insulin coming out of the pump. And then during descent, when you come in for the landing, there's about a half a unit of under-delivery. So that could certainly explain, at least in people who are quite sensitive to small doses of insulin, why the blood sugars may drop a bit during a flight and then rise after landing. There were some very good sessions covering the issue of skin issues for pump and sensor users. Lipodystrophy is found to be quite widespread. So lipodystrophy it's an inflammation and hardening of the tissue below the skin. And when this develops, it interferes with the absorption of the insulin. The insulin doesn't absorb as well, and it absorbs more slowly. So we have two problems. The insulin doesn't work as effectively, and it takes longer to kick in. Overall, in studies on children, they found 30 to 40% have existing lipodystrophy. One of the best ways to avoid that is by rotating sites effectively so that you're not overusing areas of skin. The overuse and the frequent infusion of insulin in the same spots is what seems to contribute to this. And there was some thinking at the conference that a lot of the problem is caused not by the insulin itself, but by the preservatives that are mixed with the insulin to keep the insulin from spoiling. So companies are going to be looking at alternative types of preservatives that may not cause as many issues for people. One other option that I thought might be helpful is if you are on relatively large doses, you can use a concentrated form of insulin called 100 Humalog. And that would mean you're receiving half as much preservative every time you get insulin, but still getting the right amount of insulin to cover your blood sugar needs. There were some other strategies offered up for improving skin health. Skin problems seem to run rampant in general in people with diabetes. They discouraged us from using alcohol wipes on the skin because of the drying effect, and also the fact that alcohol wipes really don't help much at all with preventing infection. Gentle removal of adhesive patches is another effective strategy. Using a solvent around the edges of the adhesive can help, or just removing the patches very slowly and gently. The depth of cannulas is recommended to be at 4 to 9 millimeters, which is approximately the depth you achieve with most infusion sets that are on the market. But there's a warning that most young boys, lean boys, don't have enough sub-Q fat on their arms and abdomen to even achieve a 4 millimeter depth. So they recommend in very lean people using other sites like the buttocks and the hips. There are adhesive patches that are recommended to use as barriers. Ones that are made of acrylate, silicone, or hydrocolloid are recommended as good adhesives. What else? Shorter site use is generally recommended. Longer tape wear tends to create a humidity below the patch that can affect the skin health. There were some innovative products at the conference. There's a company in France called Capture that's developed these hypoallergenic patches that go between your skin and whatever adhesive you have on your pump or sensor. And this barrier that they've created has a tiny hole cut where the cannula or sensor can pop through very easily and cleanly. You can learn more about those online at capturprotect.com. It's CAPTEUR protect.com. It's also a company in Ethiopia called Scheiner Biomedical, and they've developed a portable breathalyzer that measures rising levels of ketones in the breath. So it's not just for alcohol anymore. We can use breathalyzers for other things. Now, this is still in development, but it's certainly a more convenient and timely way and cleaner way to measure for ketones than urine keto sticks. Another company in France called Biocorp, which is it's a Novo Nordisk division, has created an insulin pen attachment that syncs with a mobile app, and it logs insulin delivery. Now, we have pens on the market now, like the InPen, that can do that, but this was just a small little attachment you can clip onto any Novo Nordisk FlexTouch pen, and it'll transmit a signal regarding the dose. And a U.S. company in Minnesota called Bullseye, they've created a handheld tool that you can scan over your skin to determine if there's significant scar tissue or thickening in that specific spot. So that might be a very effective way to help us rotate our sites and avoid areas where the insulin may not absorb as we want it to. As is the case with any diabetes conference, there was a lot of discussion and presentations on the use of alternative medicines for type 1 diabetes care, such as GLP-1s. There was one study called the ADJUST study, where they had people with type 1 diabetes take different doses of a GLP-1 called semaglutide. And they wanted to see if they were able to achieve 3 specific outcomes. One was 5% weight loss. The second was time in range of over 70%. And the third was no more than 3% of time in a hypoglycemic zone. And what they found was that people in the group who were taking semaglutide were able to achieve all 3 of those 36% of the time. People who did not take semaglutide achieved that 0% of the times. Clearly, use of a GLP-1 can be beneficial for weight management and overall blood sugar control. Use of GLP-1s has been correlated with significant increases in time in range, as well as total daily insulin use. Overall, in a 6-month trial, people who used the GLP-1 reduced their insulin by an average of 23%. Some of that was linked to the medication itself, because GLP-1s suppress glucagon production, but some of it was also related to weight loss, which makes us more sensitive to insulin. Gastrointestinal side effects are still a common issue. It occurs in about half of all users of GLP-1s. But overall, we see with GLP-1 use an A1C reduction of a little more than 0.5% that's maintained for years, and reductions in body mass index as well. One specific med called tirzepatide, which combines a GLP-1 and something called a GIP medication, achieved the greatest weight loss. Another medication that's studied in the use of in patients with type 1 are called SGLT2 inhibitors. So for people with type 1 who are using automated insulin delivery systems, adding an SGLT2 inhibitor improved time in range by more than 7%. Which is pretty significant. Now, these are oral medications that allow the body to release more sugar into the urine. So the kidneys excrete glucose on your behalf, which helps to lower blood sugar levels as well as insulin needs. So one of the reasons these meds haven't been used more often is that there's an increased risk for ketoacidosis. So they did a kind of a deep dive into the lifestyle patterns of the users. They found that the users who were on very low-carb diets were indeed at a pretty high risk of ketoacidosis. But the ones who were on low doses of these medications and consuming a reasonable amount of carbohydrate had very little increased risk of DKA. So that was good to see. Tandem did some research on their insulin pump users and their Control-IQ Plus algorithm just to see how they were what kind of characteristics led to better control. So they did a retrospective analysis from the downloads from thousands and thousands of systems. And one thing that they uncovered was that people who use advanced features like extended boluses and temporary basal rates average almost an hour a day more in range. Now, extended boluses are very helpful when you're eating foods that take a while to digest. Things like high-fat meals, low glycemic index types of carbs, very large meals. These situations, you don't want the insulin peaking before the food does, because that can cause a low followed by a high. So the extended bolus keeps things more stable between meals in those situations. And temporary basal rates can be used to sort of supplement what the algorithm is doing to adjust. With a temp basal rate, you're kind of telling the system ahead of time, I'm going to need a little more or a little less insulin over a period of time for things like physical activity or a lack of activity or illness, stress, alcohol consumption, any time where the normal basal insulin levels may not work. So use of those features does make a difference. We always teach our clients here how to make effective use of those in the situations where they can be applied. Beta Bionics presented some statistical data from their iLet users. iLet is a highly simplified automated insulin delivery system. Users really just have to enter the fact that they're eating. They don't have to put carbs in. There's no fine-tuning of settings with this at all. And they found that users who start out with an A1C above 7.5 almost always see reductions in their A1Cs. Even people in their 10s would see significant reductions. On average, about a 1.5 reduction in A1C. However, people who start out with A1Cs of 7 or less often see a slight increase. Adults, we see an average increase of about 0.6, and kids go up an average of 0.8. And that might be related to people who have the tight A1Cs to begin with already understanding their needs, and they may need more features to be able to fine-tune their glucose levels. The frequency of hypoglycemia really didn't change much with iLet users, but for people with elevated A1Cs before using it, almost always see some nice improvement. So I think that about wraps it up. It's a wonderful conference. Barcelona also is an amazing country. The landscape and the architecture is really something to behold. Now, granted, I didn't have time to see that because I was too busy learning all I could to share with all of you. But I did have an opportunity to visit Barcelona before COVID. My wife and I took all of our kids there on a vacation and had a marvelous, marvelous time. We even went out on a tapas tour, so we got to experience some foods we had never had before, which was kind of fun. And I learned my biggest challenge with the travel, at least in terms of my own blood sugar, was dealing with the sleepless night, because it was a red-eye flight from Philadelphia to Europe, and I can't sleep on planes, maybe just a minute here and there. So my whole sleep schedule was completely flipped. And that was a bit challenging because times of day when I normally get my dawn effect, it didn't happen because I hadn't been sleeping for a while. So it took a little bit of adjustment once I got there. But once I got back on my normal sleep schedule, things settled in. Thank you all for listening. I hope you learned a thing or two. Please reach out to us at Integrated Diabetes Services if there's any question you have or anything you'd like to work on with your diabetes management. And just as a reminder to everyone out there, keep thinking like a pancreas. I'm Gary Scheiner, signing off.
Thanks for tuning in to Think Like a Pancreas, the podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to like, follow, or subscribe on your favorite podcast app. On behalf of Think Like a Pancreas, the podcast, I'm Gary Scheiner, wishing you a fantastic week ahead. And don't forget to think like a pancreas.